Well, hello everyone. Welcome to World at War Comics. My next special guest, Mr. Mike Marts. Mike, let me go through, right? Executive Vice President, Editor-in-Chief, Mad Cave Comics. Mad Cave's celebrating 10 years. Here you are, part of this amazing anniversary, all these incredible titles. I had the opportunity to meet you at WonderCon, which was absolutely fantastic. But before we jump into all of that, my friend, would love to know, how are you doing with everything that's going on in your life right now?
Oh, managing.
Yeah.
One of the great things about Man Cave is that there's no shortage of projects, and there's no shortage of new ideas.
Yeah.
So, when you come to work on Monday, you really have no idea what's in store for you for the rest of the week. And there's ideas that come in from Mark London, from Mark Gerwin, from Chris Fernandez, our publisher, from myself and our editorial team. And, at the end of the week, all of a sudden you're like, hey, we're doing this new series, or, we're starting this new initiative. Um, you know, the whole attitude at Maycave is just one of courage, risk taking, bravery. So it's it's crazy, it's busy, but we love it.
Well, I would love to dig into how you make those choices because when you have so much going on, right, you have to pick and choose. You just can't do everything. But I would love to first talk about your history because my assumption is everything that you have done in your past with Marvel and DC and Aftershock have probably led to your ability to make those kind of decisions to know what's the right title at the right time, which ones do we kind of stay away from right now. Maybe that's better for 2 years from now. Can we kind of talk about your history and how you got into comics to begin with?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Um, well, I mean, I grew up a Marvel zombie. I started collecting comics when I was like age 10, and my main thing at the time was X-Men. I lived, breathed, and loved X-Men. It was my everything. And my knowledge of the Marvel universe grew, and my size of my comic collection grew, and I just fell more and more in love with the medium. Um, at the same time, as a young kid, I was always, you know, creating stories, whether it was role playing in Dungeons and Dragons, or playing Star Wars with my friends, or trying to write my own stories. I was always in some type of storytelling mode. And as I got a little bit older, and I realized, oh, okay, maybe I could actually try to do this as a living. And so maybe like my late teens into college, my goal was really just to become the next Chris Claremont. Like he was my idol. I loved, what he was doing on X-Men. I mean, he had written X-Men since I was a kid. Um, and with all the great storylines that he created, I was always imagining new stories in my mind, just kind of jumping off of what he had done. That's how much I think energy and creativity he had in his stories. So I kind of like buckled down and just realized I wanted to become a comic book writer. And I think I wrote to Marvel, like, how do I do this? And they actually sent me back like a one-page form letter that said, here's the steps on how to submit stories to Marvel Comics. You have to, do it in one page. You have to tell us what characters' motivations are, what's at stake. And so they gave you all these guidelines and everything, and I memorized it. And once a week, I would sit down at my father's typewriter and I would type out a new story idea. Silver Surfer one week, and Defenders next week, and the Inhumans the week after that. And I would mail these things in, and occasionally I would get the polite rejection letter back in the mail, and thanks but no thanks. Um, but I kept doing it, and I was just like, perseverance, and I'm just going to keep trying. And after a little while, I made some inroads in that I knew a professional inker that worked for Marvel Comics, and his name was Mark McKenna, and he lived in my town, and he was also a customer at the comic book store that I worked at, and Mark offered. He was so nice. He offered to bring my stories into Marvel and hand deliver them to the editors,
Oh
and
wow.
yeah, which was great. It was eye opening to me, and so then I actually got some feedback on two of my stories. One was from Ralph Macchio, and the other feedback I got was from Fabian Nicieza, who were both staff editors at the time, and their feedback was just kind of mind blowing to me. It was constructive, but then really educating me on like what I needed to do to improve my stories. And these guys they didn't owe me anything, but they just they did it because they were you know comic storytellers themselves, and I guess they enjoyed the teaching aspect of it, and that kind of opened my eyes to the whole world of editing comics. And I realized, okay, that the person who is the editor at these companies, at Marvel and DC, they're not just proofreading a comic book. There's much more that goes into it. It's a whole behind the scenes thing. It's the ability to hire the writers and artists, to choose the best talent, to guide the focus of a given title or a given character, to help develop storylines. Many different hats that the editor wears, and my eyes were open to everything that an editor could be. And it's not that I didn't want to be a comic writer anymore, but I kind of put that in the back seat, and I made my focus trying to become an editor in comic books. And not long after that, I learned that there was an internship program at Marvel, so I applied. Probably thinking I would never get the call. And then one day I was working at the comic book shop, and the phone rings, and my boss picks it up, and he's like, "Hey, Mike, Marvel's on the other line." And so I
That's
was like, "Wow!"
crazy.
My heart was beating, and I was 21 at the time, and I talked to um, the person on the other line. Her name was Mary McFerrin. She was Tom DeFalco's assistant. This was like 1993. And she said, "Come on up and interview for the internship." So I took the train into New York. It was about an hour away from where I was. And I interviewed with this awesome editor, Nel Yomtov, who had been a lifer at Marvel since the late 70s. He'd worked in the bullpen and in licensing, and then he made his way into editorial. And I really hit it off with him. And I started as an intern in his office in June of '93. And that office was kind of like the West Coast Avengers office. So it was like Iron Man and War Machine and Scarlet Witch and Hawkeye, and we also had Darkhawk. And so that's where I got my start. I started as Nell's assist or intern, and then maybe about half a year later, his assistant editor was moving on to another assignment within Marvel, and there was an assistant editor spot open up, and I applied for it. Fingers crossed. I was like, I really hope I get it. I didn't know that Nell all along was like, I want Mike as my guy. But I didn't know. I thought I was competing against a bunch of other people, and maybe I wouldn't get it, and that would have been the end of my comics career. But he hired me, and I started right around Christmas time of '93, and then I've never left the industry.
Now let's go over some of the titles that you worked on, right? So you work with X-Men, Guardians of the Galaxy. Then went over you when did you go to DC? Because you worked on Batman, I saw as well, right?
I did, yeah. So man, it's a pretty complex history that I
Yeah.
have. I've had three different tours of duty at Marvel Comics. So all in all, I worked there 13 years, but that was split up among three different time periods.
Okay.
Um, and the first time I was there, I was an assistant editor, and I was working on the books that I just mentioned, like Iron Man and the other West Coast Avenger stuff, and also like Fantastic Four and those kind of that family of titles. Um, and then I'd left, and I worked at Wizard for a while as their promotions manager. Um, I was there for about a year, and then I did 2 years at Acclaim Comics. So it was the Valiant Heroes, but They were owned by Acclaim Entertainment at the time.
Yeah.
And then 2 years of working at Acclaim, I got a call from Marvel, and they needed a new X-Men editor. Not the main X-Men editor. They needed like someone to edit the secondary titles. And yeah, I was always in love with Marvel, and I kind of felt like I might return there at some point. So I was definitely excited to go back. And I went back and edited like Deadpool and Bishop and Gambit and Wolverine. So a lot of like the solo characters in the
Yeah.
X-Men family. And I did that for about 3 years, and then after that, kind of I graduated to become the main X-Men editor. So I was doing New X-Men and Uncanny X-Men and Extreme X-Men and eventually Astonishing X-Men and Wolverine Origin. Uh, and at that time, for a while, the X-Men office was, because I don't want to say small, but it kind of contracted
Okay.
from how it was like in the 90s. It had contracted a bit, but then in the early 2000s, it kind of started expanding a little bit more, and we were adding more titles. So I had a few editors working, associate editors and assistant editors working with me on the X-Men books. And that time at Marvel was about 7 years long. And then 2006 is when I went over to DC to become the group editor of the Batman books.
Yeah. I mean, that's gotta be pretty exciting. I mean, to be able to work on X-Men, Iron Man, and then to go over to DC and then automatically like right away work on Batman. I mean, you're hitting all the big ones there, Mike. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's funny because if I went back to my childhood, I mentioned I was a Marvel zombie, but
Yeah.
the one DC character that I loved was Batman. I mean,
Yeah.
and I think I knew Batman before I knew any Marvel heroes. I had a Batman cape that my mom sewed for me, and yeah, I loved the Batman TV show. So being able to work on both childhood loves, the X-Men and then Batman, was a huge reward. And um, it's funny, I kind of blindly went over to DC, not really knowing what my titles were going to be. I mainly went over because Dan DiDio, I'd met him and become friends with him, and I was just really just energized by what he was doing in the early 2000s, because he really helped to change the face of the company at DC. Um, it was, they told good stories and they had good creators, but when he came along, he just brought this energy and enthusiasm, and he has this infectious way about him where he could just like draw people in and get the
Yeah.
best out of them. Um, and I was watching that happen from over at Marvel, and I was like, that's pretty cool. And eventually he told me he had an offering and wanted to hire me, and I went over, and I really didn't know what I was going to work on, and he was kind of being coy about it. And and like the first few months, I was doing like Legion of Superheroes and some other, like, I won't say like secondary titles, but things that I was pretty sure weren't going to last that long. Um, and what I didn't know is that Peter Tomasi, who was the current Batman editor at the time, he was planning to leave and go freelance, full time writing. And Dan knew this the whole time, and he knew that he was going to put me onto the Batman books, but he wasn't going to say anything. Um, and then when it happened, I was, uh, you know, head over heels. I was
Yeah.
ecstatic.
Yeah. I've had the opportunity to meet obviously yourself now, um, Jeff Johns. Um, there, anytime any of the Peter Tomasi, anytime you mention Dan Didio in front of them, the warmth that you feel about working with Dan is the same from every single person that I've ever met. That I've had, I think, three or four people. Not that I know a lot of people, but the three or four people that I have met all have the same exact feeling. And I've had the opportunity to talk to Dan. He's supposed to be on the show in a couple months, but I mean, what a wonderful human being, and what he did do at DC as a fan was extremely appreciated. And man, it's just really cool to hear in the industry so many people have the same feelings about somebody. I think that really speaks of his character and how he handled his job, but most importantly, how he handled the people around him. I don't know if you agree with that or.
Oh, I agree 100%. With Dan, there was intense passion, still
Yeah,
intense passion with
yeah,
anything he does, and he puts every fiber of his being into what he's working on. And sometimes that passion could be too much for some people.
mm-hmm.
Um, I found it to be just fine. I was happy that someone um, felt that close to the material and to care that much about the material. With Dan, uh, I could stop into his office any time of day, and no matter what he was doing, he would put it down and say, sit on the couch and let's talk. Whether it was talking about storylines, talking about creators, talking about deadlines, um, talking about family. It didn't matter. Dan made the time for you, and um, it was always worthwhile. And that's not true of all bosses. You don't always get that. Their time is spread out among a million different things, and sometimes they can find it hard to give you the time. But with Dan, that was never the case.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what a mentor to have and the incredible career that you've built for yourself over the last 30 years. Pretty impressive. Now, can we move to AfterShock? Like, how did AfterShock come in after Marvel and DC? And am I missing anything in between, by the way?
Well, in 2000, at the end of 2014, DC, they decided they were going to move the New York offices out to California, to Los Angeles. And I mean, I loved working at DC. I really thought I would work there till I was going to retire. Very, very happy there, but it was really difficult to make the decision to move out to LA. Had a house here, had a family, um, and other factors too. So I just couldn't make the move, and I had always remained friendly with my people back at Marvel, and I called them up and specifically Dan Buckley, and wondered if perhaps something was open. And fortunately, at the same time, Steve Wacker, who had been at Marvel for a while, he was moving to the West Coast to take on a new role in film and animation. And so Marvel had an opening for a senior level editor. Um, and it all happened pretty quickly. I was extremely lucky. And I went back to Marvel in early 2015 as an executive editor, and I went back to the X-Men books, which was amazing. A lot had changed in the 8 years that I was gone, so it took me a while to kind of catch up and get used to
Uh,
everything.
you probably heard
But
there's a lot of changes still happening in the X-Men room, right?
yeah, there's always changes happening in the X-Men room,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I at that point I got to work with Brian Michael Bendis, and I had been friendly with him for years, but never had the opportunity to work with him. So here I was working with him not on one but two X-Men books, and then also working with him on Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh wow.
Um, so I feel like I got back there, I lucked out, um, and my third time back in Marvel was pretty brief. It was a year and a half. I felt so lucky to be there and to have a job and to not, you know, yeah, I was worried about am I going to be leaving comics when DC moves west. So I was really happy to be there. A lot had changed, not only in the X-Men room, but a lot had changed with the company, with the culture, and everything. And to be honest, I tried real hard, but I don't feel I ever kind of just fit back in there. And maybe that was on me, maybe it was on the company. I don't know, but it just wasn't the perfect fit. And an opportunity came up, and it was the birth of Aftershock. And there was a guy, Joe Pruitt, who, is a lifer in this industry. He, had worked in Caliber back in the day, had won an Eisner at Caliber. He created Negative Burn, which is a very popular anthology series. And he had written for me at Marvel too. He wrote some X-Men movie adaptation stuff, and um, he was my fill-in, or my go-to guy if another writer was running late. Joe was my go-to guy to come in and write a script overnight. So we'd always remained friends, and he called me up and he said, "Hey, there's this new company starting up. We're going to focus on creator-owned comics, and we need someone to, run the creative aspect of it." And it was a tough decision, but kind of everything that I'd been through on the X-Men books, on the Batman books, kind of building franchises, building and developing lines of publishing or publishing lines of, a family of titles. That was almost like an exercise in kind of creating a small company, because it wasn't just the editorial stuff. You were thinking about marketing, you were thinking about long-term forecasting, what stories, what projects you were going to do next year and the year after that. So it was all kind of like training me to kind of build a company. And that part of it just really attracted me. And also, the ability to, number one, be my own boss, and also the ability to work from home. After commuting into New York City for 20 plus years, the idea of doing my work from home was extremely attractive. And my daughter at the time was young, and I was like, this is what a fantastic way to be home and spend more time with her. So, I jumped to AfterShock, and it was risky. It definitely felt risky, but I was happy to have Joe as a teammate. Joe was our publisher, and yeah, we built the company. I think I spent 8 years there, 7 plus years, and I feel there was a lot of great stuff created, and so many great creators coming in there. It's sad, to realize that it didn't last, and that's it's too bad. It still stings because there was a dream there to do something. But about 7 or 8 years into my time there, Man Cave appeared on the radar. And you talked about Mark before. Mark London is someone similar to Dan DiDio. They're not the exact same person, but when you talk about passion for the industry, passion for storytelling, passion for trying out new things, passion for taking risks and jumping into, what might seem like dangerous waters, but just arming yourself and going in. That's Mark London. Yeah. And very similar to, Dan DiDio and what attracted me to working at DC at the time. I had a few phone calls with Mark early on, and I just felt like this is someone that I want to work for. And there's also, after 7 or 8 years of being my own boss and everything at AfterShock, the idea of kind of going back to a company where I was an employee was pretty attractive as well. And it's funny, when I was at AfterShock, the Mad Cave guys, were, I would say, friendly competition. I would see them sometimes at New York Comic Con, and their booth was kind of near AfterShock's, and you're always kind of like looking over and seeing what they're doing, and they're looking and seeing what you're doing, and a lot of times you work with the same creators. So I was always kind of aware of Mad Cave, but the point in time in which I I really just woke up and I took them seriously, and I said, wow, they're for real. Um, was 2 years ago, the summer of 2022, when they acquired Paper Cuts.
Mm.
And, Paper Cuts was already a very successful middle grade publisher and was doing fantastic stuff. And for, this company, which, kind of, I was just picturing them as like, the little engine that could. And suddenly you see, oh, they're acquiring Paper Cuts. Like you take a step back and you're like, okay, like they're not just making good comics, trying to make good comics. They are trying to become a force within the industry, trying to change the game within the industry. Um, they're trying to make a difference, and no matter what, based on their decisions and what they're doing, that they're here to stay. Um, and that combined with my conversations with Mark London, um, it was definitely enough for me to say this is the place for me.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look at like a Mad Cave and you see these imprints like a Maverick and a Paper Cuts coming under the Mad Cave label, and you see that diversification of storytelling, that way you're really reaching from a young age, really up to, I'm reading comics all the time still, right? So I don't know when that ends for me. It doesn't look like ever. My wife doesn't think so because I keep buying them. But I mean, you really start to close those gaps that I think in comic books, those gaps need to be closed because you're starting to get a lot of young readers and their first experience in the comic world isn't really a traditional comic book. Not that Paper Cuts is all traditional comic books. You have, some of you go to Target, and you know what they are, right? The I can't admit Captain Underpants and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing titles. They do a great job. But that's who young people are really being attracted to. And then with the growth of manga, do you think like this is kind of the secret sauce for a publisher like a Mad Cave to be able to hopefully bring in a readership and then be able to keep them long term?
I do. I feel that, I mean, what I've learned over the years, and I mean, it's no, you know, big secret, but
Yeah.
I, I definitely understand now that diversification of product is essential to long-term success. There's DC and Marvel, and they've always been here, and they're always going to be here in some way, shape, or form. But for everyone else, you're always going to be measured against Marvel and DC. Um, but to really survive and to thrive and to grow and to last, you can't just be a superhero publisher. You can't just rely on creator-owned books. Um, you have to be able to appeal to all audiences, and not just different types of readers, but different age groups. And then also the different types of consumers, because the direct market consumers, people like you and me that grew up on comics and went into the comic book shop every Wednesday or Friday for new books, that is a dedicated group, but it's relatively small. And, we're trained to buy things a certain way. And that part of the industry, parts of it have become a little stagnant. And it's not for lack of effort. All the publishers, all the creators, all the readers really trying hard. I think the pandemic was good in some ways for the industry, but in other ways, it kind of made the industry take a step back. So to really survive and to do well, depending on the direct market alone, it can't be enough. You really have to look to the mass market, to the book market, combine that with the direct market, and then I feel you have a force. You have a publisher that can survive and last. Um, because when I came to Man Cave, they were just in the process of switching their distributors over to Simon and Schuster, and not to knock any other book distributor, but when I got to see what a distributor like Simon and Schuster was able to do for a company like Mad Cave, it was eye opening. Just seeing their reach, seeing what type of power their buyers had, um, quantities that they would order. It was impressive, and I think all that just kind of comes together and paints a picture of a publisher that is diverse and can offer many different types of things. Even within our direct market area, our core comic book floppies that we put out, even there we are diverse. We have a dedicated focus on creator-owned books. We have things like a book from Mags Visaggio and Mike Oming and Taki Soma right now, Galaxy Madness. We do books with Kurt Pyers, with David Hazan. So we're really focused on the creator-owned area. We also have things that we kind of refer to as homegrown, concepts that we develop in-house. Many of them have been written by Mark London, whether it's Battle Cats or, his upcoming Underworld initiative, which hits later this fall. And then other times there are concepts which we develop in-house and we hand out to other writers. There's been a lot of things like that in May Cave's 10-year history, where someone like Cullen Bunn or Joe Corallo or Anthony Cleveland will step in and take one of our concepts and then run with it.
Yeah.
And then you add on a third aspect to our direct market initiative, which is making great comics with someone else's IP.
Yeah.
And when you license things like Gatchaman or Flash Gordon or Dick
Tracy, yeah.
Right? I mean, it's things with, these are properties with a built-in audience or fan base already. And it's surprising sometimes to see how large those fan bases can be. With the creator-owned books or the homegrown books, brilliant ideas are taking place there and great comics are being made, but people are reading them for the first time. So you have to sell them on the property and say, hey, this is great, and here's why you should think it's great. With Gatchaman or Dick Tracy or Flash Gordon, people already know the concept. So really what you're doing in those cases is saying, here's that thing that you have loved forever, and now here's the best possible spin on it. Yeah. We got exactly the right creators for it, and we're telling the best stories, and people can enjoy it like that.
Yeah. And when you get an Alex Segura and a Jeremy Adams, that certainly helps with those type of IPs. I mean, issue 1 on both of those were just top notch. I think Jeremy Adams specifically is one of the youngest talents in writing right now. What he's doing at DC on Green Lantern, what he did with Flash is just phenomenal. And to have him on this Flash Gordon, I mean, because I think you would agree, Mike, not only do you have these IPs that are known, they do need to be reintroduced to a younger reader as well, right? Because these are older IPs. And although I grew up watching, the Flash Gordon movie, which now you look at, I mean, it's pretty corny, but I loved it when I watched it. The take that Jeremy brings to that is just phenomenal. And then you look at Dick Tracy, and I have a few old Silver Age Dick Tracy, and it's so different from what Alex Segura is doing, where it's a little bit more modern. Obviously, it's a little bit more edgier. Like, these are, I think, fantastic titles to add to the portfolio of the Nottinghams and everything else that's been so successful at Mad Cave.
You're absolutely right. And, with the creators that we have working on these titles, we intentionally sought out creators who had a built-in passion for each of these properties. In the case of Dick Tracy, it was kind of easy. Um, Alex Segura and Michael Marcy had already attached themselves to the IP, um, which was great. It kind of came as a package deal, and we already had the right talent in place when we decided to do Dick Tracy. But you're right. You could see as soon as you read the book, it can appeal to any fan of past iterations of Dick Tracy, whether it was the old Chester Gould stuff or even if it was the Warren Beatty movie. All of that's in there. But Alex and Michael and Geraldo Borges, the artist, they're telling that story in a way that it doesn't conflict with any of the old classic stuff, but it certainly is presented in a very modern way. And one of the things I wondered when we first started on Dick Tracy was, all right, I mean, I know the outline, the story outline is great, the scripts are great, but how are we going to pull this off with a yellow trench coat?
Yeah.
And yet, you open it up and it totally works. It totally works.
Totally
the
works.
mood and atmosphere that Geraldo has created there, it totally works. And like on Gatchaman, Gatchaman was something where, we knew we would be able to sustain more than just a regular series. With the amount of characters and storylines and villains, there was a lot of toys to play with there. And we knew we could support some limited series, some one shots. And the more we started thinking about this, the more it seemed like this is going to be the job of more than one person. And I started thinking back to my days at DC, where I had started a Batman weekly book called Batman Eternal. And with that book, I kind of adopted the showrunner idea, like the TV writing model, where you'd bring in one main writer and then a few other satellite writers to kind of work with them, and together they would just be this force to be reckoned with. And we didn't exactly duplicate that with Gatchaman, but we took a similar approach, and we had three extremely diehard Gatchaman fans in Steve Orlando, Cullen Bunn, and Tommy Lee Jones. And we didn't know what it would be like when we put the three of them together, but we did. And it was just like
so far so good
magic. So far so good. We knew that we were creating magic when we put the three of these guys together. And then you add to that Chris Batista as the artistic anchor on the series, and it's the icing on top of the cake. It's what's funny is
it's crucial, right, for a title like that to have that look as well. So I feel like you said, man, perfect artist for that.
Absolutely, yeah. He It's funny. When I first got to Mad Cave, and we hadn't signed the Gatchaman deal yet, but it was being talked about. My mind went immediately to Chris, because I want to say it was like almost 25 years ago. I was at Marvel, and I was working on this little limited series called Space Knights, which it was like it was using characters that were created in the ROM comic book.
Oh, yeah.
But ROM didn't belong to Marvel anymore, so you couldn't do ROM comics, but we could do comics based off of these Space Knights characters because Marvel owned them. And I'm trying to remember who wrote it. Maybe Dan Abbott. I don't know. But Chris Batista was the artist. And Chris lived in New York, so he would come up to the Marvel offices and drop off his pages like once a week. And Chris was always great. He'd come in and he'd sit down and he'd spend an hour there. And he was like one of the first guys that taught me about like what the best anime were. And he would totally school me on like, oh, you got to watch this first, and then you got to watch this. And he would bring in his pages of Space Knights, and like at the end of the stack of pages, you'd see some doodles, and he was drawing Gatchaman characters. And I was like, oh man, you're a fan of a lot of people here in the States know it as G-Force or Battle of the
Yeah.
Planets. I was like, oh, you're a Battle of the Planets fan? And he was like, no, Gatchaman. And like he would then show me these other drawings, and that just always stuck with me. And I just loved his interpretation of the characters. It was true to the original anime, but also at the same time, it was his own thing. And I never forgot that. And here we are 25 years later, and I was like, oh, I know who we have to hire for this book, Chris Batista.
That is crazy. That
Yeah.
over all of these years, right? Here you have this perfect artist, and I mean, was it easy? Like, was it an easy phone call? And he was like, "Oh my God, yes, of course." Or was he working on a lot of other things at the time?
He was working on other things, but I called him very early in the process. Maybe even before we had signed the deal with Tatsunoko, the licenser. And I told him, hey, if this type of thing were to come to Mad Cave, would you be interested in illustrating it? And he was like, you know, yes, yes, yes. Like I'm there, I'm there. And over the next few months, as we waited for contracts to be signed and the ink to dry, Chris would check in with me, like, "How about that thing? How about that thing?" I was like, "We're almost there. We're almost there." And then, eventually, at some point, we got there.
Yeah,
And yeah, it's been phenomenal to
yeah.
get to work with Chris again. I've worked with him a few times in my career, but I would say this one is by far the most rewarding.
That is exciting. Well, there's another title that I'm really excited for, and this is Kosher Mafia that is about to take place with David Hazan. Oh my gosh, this looks like next level. Like, I didn't even know what to expect. I almost don't want to know too much just because I've seen some of the art just on the Mad Cave website. There's been a few like Instagram and TikTok posts that have gone out, like little teasers. But this looks next level, insane, crazy, awesome. Um, are you as
It
excited too?
Very excited. Yeah, I mean, so Kosher Mafia. It's funny. At my time at AfterShock, um, we had someone on staff there who he was the type of guy who would go out to the comic shops every Wednesday and buy every single comic that came out. So he was kind of like my talent scout for a while, and he would let me know, hey, you should check out this writer, you should check out this artist, you should check out this writer. And very early on in the Nottingham days, um, uh, this guy at Epshak would say, you have to check out David's writing. And I was like, okay, I will. So I checked it out. I loved it. I thought Nottingham was
It was all right,
I, I thought
incredible, right? It's just incredible.
incredible, right? Because first you hear about the concept, and you're like, I feel like I've seen that before. A new take
Yeah.
on Robin Hood, and then you read it,
No,
you're like,
no, no,
no,
no,
I have
not
not
at
seen
all.
this take before. And what him and Shane Connery Volk were doing together was just mind blowing.
Yeah.
And I needed, David to be at the party I was, having. So we started talking to David, and we hired him for a book that actually never saw daylight, unfortunately, but he was doing a great job on it. It was kind of this like elder zombies, witches story told in the far past. It was kind of fantasy, but anyway, it was great. Um, and then he pitched us at Aftershock this book called Kosher Mafia, and um, a few of us there really loved it, and I think we were very close to acquiring it. And then we realized it kind of overlapped with another project that we had going on at the time. And as a small publisher, you really try to not to do too much in the way of overlapping, and have each project be unique. So regrettably, we passed on Kosher Mafia. So then, flash forward a year or so, and I find myself in, my first week at Man Cave, and I'm getting acquainted with what books I'm going to be working on, what's in the, pipeline, what we're developing. And I'm looking at a schedule, and I see this book, Kosher Mafia. And I'm like, yes, yes. The guys at Man Cave were smart enough to acquire this thing because
That's
it
awesome.
rocks. Yeah. And I forget if Sammy Cavella was attached to it originally. I'm not sure. But you really couldn't find a better writer artist combination than David and Sammy Cavella for this particular story. Um, and, as an editor, you read a dozen issues per week. Um, and, many of them are awesome. But Kosher Mafia #1 was one of those issues where when I read it, I kind of stopped what I was doing and I went on to our internal company Slack messaging board,
Yeah.
and I said to everybody, "This is a important issue. This is a killer first issue." Um, and it's funny, like I read that several months ago, and I can't believe we're still not there yet. It doesn't come out until September. Um, but it's going to blow people away. I know it will, and I would say like for fans of things like Fargo, I think that's probably the right vibe in
Okay.
terms of, it's part crime, it's part noir, it's part family dynamics, um, bitter rivalries, and it's a period piece too. So I I think people who get into something like Fargo will
Yeah.
definitely enjoy Kosher Mafia.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a must have.
It's a must. I mean, it looks like a must have. I cannot wait to have that thing in my hands because it looks, I mean, just the covers that I saw, and there's a couple pieces just of internal artwork that just look phenomenal. It looks gory. It look everything that I would want in a book. It looks like it's all part of that. I mean, very similar to Nottingham, right? Because it could get a little bit like that too, and that's what I love about it. So yeah, I'm super excited about that. Looking forward, Mike. Um, we got Kosher Mafia. I'm as long as you've released it and you've already talked about. Is there anything else that fans should be looking for around that same time frame, September, that maybe you and I haven't talked about yet? That you said you think this should be on your
Mm-hmm.
radar?
Yeah, sure. And also with Kosher Mafia, I misspoke. It actually comes out first week of August.
Oh, August.
Um,
Okay.
but yeah, we have a few other titles that are debuting over the next month or so that are extremely exciting. Um, we have our Flash Gordon spinoff series, which is called Defenders of
That's
the
right.
Earth,
Defenders. Yep.
and yeah, that's written by Dan DiDio. It's funny. It was this time last year. I was at San Diego Comic Con, and he came up to the Mad Cave booth, and we were just kind of catching up and talking. And he was like, "I saw you just got the Flash Gordon license," and I'm like, "Yeah, we did." He's like, "If you ever need someone to write stories, you." And I was like, "Well," I was like, "Actually, Dan, as a matter of fact," and we were casting for Defenders of the Earth at the time, and he was like, I love the Phantom. I love Flash Gordon. I love Mandrake. I love Lothar. And there was this passion for the characters. And I was like, well, listen, next week after San Diego, let's get on the phone and we'll catch up and we'll talk about it. And he was like, yeah, cool. And then the next day, he shows up. He came back to the booth. He was like, so I thought up all these ideas last night. And I was like, awesome. I was like, this is great. But that's a fun series. It's
Yeah.
I think an eight issue limited series. It's drawn by Jim Calafiore, who's an artist I've worked with probably 100 times over the course of my career. And that's just fantastic. And it kind of plays in a little bit to what Jeremy Adams is doing on the main series. But at the same time, it's its own thing. So people who just read that can enjoy it, but for people who are reading the whole Flash Gordon tapestry, then it's a more rewarding experience. Um, We have a OGN that's coming out next month called A Phone Call Away, which is written by Rich Douek, and it's illustrated by Russell. Sorry, Russell Olson. And this is it's a OGN, so it's probably 120 pages, yeah, maybe a little under 100 pages, but it's a um, based on it's like true crime, basically, and I don't know that it's another thing which when I read it I was just kind of blown away at Rich's talent. Um, and I think anyone will enjoy this, but certainly fans of crime books will enjoy it. Um, and then we also have um, Dark Empty Void, which we just announced, and that's by Zach Kaplan, who I feel like every time Zach Kaplan steps up to the plate, he like hits it into the
Knocks it out
outfield
of the park. Yeah.
and gets like a triple or a home run, um, and it's illustrated by Chris Sheehan. Just very kind of sci-fi, getting into some astrophysics and um, deals with black holes. And I don't want to give too much away, but
Yeah.
if you're a fan of that type of stuff, if you're a fan of like the recent show Dark Matter, I think people will enjoy that. So that's coming out in September, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some other things. The Body Trade we have coming out. That's another new creator-owned series by Zach Thompson and Jock. Not Jock Jock, but Jock Jok. So there's two Jock artists working in the industry.
Yeah.
Both are fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Body Trade gets into some pretty gruesome subject matter.
Sure sounds like it would.
Yeah, it does. At its core, it's a father-son story and the love that a father has for his son. But the road that Zach takes you on is it's it's mind blowing and gets into some pretty
Anything but
dark
normal,
territory.
right?
Right. But that's what Zach excels at.
Yeah.
Which is funny because if you meet Zach, he's just the nicest, sweetest guy in the world. So,
Sometimes those are the guys you got to watch out for. They come up with some of the most unique, like I don't know if you've met Patrick Horvath and have read his Beneath the Trees, like the nicest, kindest. And then you read his comic book and it's about a serial killer. It's you're like the mind in you, man. I'm a little worried, man, because it's not matching what I'm seeing here. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that's awesome.
yeah. So that's those are the things we have coming up over the next few months, and we kind of end the summer season and with the kickoff of Mark London's first title, Revolution 9, and that's the first of his underworld themed book, which is kind of like a little shared universe that he's created, and it's just you the creativity that comes from this guy is out of this world, and it's sometimes a challenge just to create one good comic, but he's right now simultaneously working on three different comics and then finding cool ways to weave things in together. So fantastic job by the boss.
Yeah. Now let's talk really quickly about where fans can meet you, meet the team. Do you have a plan to have a booth like at WonderCon, at San Diego Comic-Con coming up, and maybe some other cons leading up to New York?
Yeah, we'll be at a bunch of shows over the next few months. I mean, yeah, certainly, we just did ALA, which is the American Librarian Association, which isn't a consumer show. It's more business to business, but that was fantastic for us. And then we'll be at San Diego in 2 weeks, and we'll have a booth there. It's right kind of in the middle of the floor, right when you walk in the door, so it's really easy to spot us. yeah, I think we're attending WonderCon. We'll be at Baltimore and New York Comic Con in the fall. I think we'll be at the Toronto show. I don't think they call it Fan Expo anymore, but or maybe they do. But whatever the main Toronto show is, we'll be there. So yeah, all the major shows will be there in some way, shape, or form, and then we try to do other like small regional shows depending on where certain members of the staff are located. There's a few of us out in the New York area, and we try to do um, the Brooklyn Book Fair. We do FlameCon. Um, so there's a bunch of different things that we try to attend, but we have a pretty full calendar when it comes to shows.
Yeah, that's incredible. And then, as far as keeping up with everything that's happening within the world of Mad Cave, Maverick and or Paper Cut, should people just go to the Mad Cave website? Is that the best place probably to find all the most up-to-date information?
Yep, madcavestudios.com is the primary source for both Mad Cave product and Maverick product, and then papercuts.com is where people can go for anything that we release to our middle grade publisher.
Perfect, perfect. And then lastly, social media, Mike, are you pretty aggressive yourself on social media, or do you kind of allow everything to happen through kind of the Mad Cave and some of the other stuff?
I do. Actually, the latter of what you said. I kind of take what Mad Cave does, and then I'll share that and spread it out into the world. It was one of my New Year's resolutions to be more active on social media myself, and I had a good start, and then I kind of petered out. It's not one of my strong suits, but I'm always trying. But certainly, I mean, the Mad Cave marketing and social media team are the best I've ever worked with.
Yeah, they're phenomenal.
There's just very good. Getting the message out, doing it with the right frequency, captivating images and videos with music. They just do a fantastic job. So they make it easy. I can just come in and then just share something.
I love it, Mike. Mike, is there anything that we're kind of missing that you would want fans to know that maybe we didn't touch on today?
Oh, I got so many stories to tell. That could be like another session. Um, but I do think it's just important to note that the industry has its ups and downs, and we might currently be going through some struggles, but I've seen us go up and down and come out of problems before and grow and thrive. And I know as an industry together, we're gonna all come together and get through the current issues and come out stronger on the other side. And in the meantime, we'll just keep making great stories and great comics, and that's what we're all here for.
Absolutely. And we certainly want to encourage all of our listeners and watchers to ensure that they get into their local LCS and they're going through the preview magazine and they're ensuring that they're ordering all these amazing titles, making sure you're putting it into your box. That way it's ready for you when you go in on your Wednesday morning. But Mike, I really appreciate you, one, being super flexible with me. I appreciate that. And also coming on. I hope that we could do this again in a few months when there's even more amazing news that is coming out that we want to kind of share about Mad Cave and everything that's going on with all the stuff that's under the Mad Cave umbrella. But I'm loving as a fan everything that's happening, and congratulations on all the success this year. You've really built something, I think, pretty strong that is going to jump right into 2025 with no problem.
Thanks, Tommy. We appreciate it. It's good to know that we've got fans out there and support and people who enjoy our product. And I will say, if you've been pleasantly surprised at the moves that we've made over the past 10 years, and especially over like the last year or two, there is more to come. So, definitely stay tuned, because there are some things going on behind the scenes that once they get announced, I think they're really going to take people by surprise.
Absolutely love it. Love to hear that. And that's how you stay relevant, right? And that's how you diversify. So I think you're doing all the right things. Mike, I really appreciate your time. Thank you. Have an amazing rest of the week. Have an incredible weekend. And I hope we get to do this again soon.
Thank you, Tommy. Me too.
All right.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.